This week, we start things off with Sergey Bratus, Program Manager at the Information Innovation Office at DARPA, where we will discuss you can't defend what you can't define. In the security news, Shim Shady, up Shim's Creek, whatever you want to call it, there's a vulnerability affecting pretty much all Linux distributions and other operating systems as well that we're going to dig into on this episode. When your toothbrush attacks the internet, or some claim, glibc has some vulnerabilities, and not all got a CVE, and one is for the algorithm lovers. Google shows some love for Rust, beating BitLocker in 43 seconds. DEF CON was canceled, then uncanceled, and I'm not even joking. It was, I know you don't believe me, but it was. And the government is here to unlock your router. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. In the ever-present threat of cyber attacks, even a simple wrong click can spell disaster. ThreatLocker built endpoint protection so you can operate a zero-trust security posture built on a default deny. ThreatLocker allows you to control what runs and what those applications can do, access, and how they interact. Don't let your trusted applications be used against you. For comprehensive protection against evolving threats, turn to ThreatLocker Cyber Heroes at securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more.
Welcome to the show! But first, let me introduce you to a man who just learned the meanings of tomfoolery and shenanigans, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. We're coming to you in super low definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself. It is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 816, being recorded on February 7th, 2024, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left.
Yeah.
I feel that I need to say, which side of me that you're on for some strange reason. I don't know why, but if you were to my right, I would have to state that you were in fact to my right, but usually you are to my left, and I feel the need to declare that at the top of every show.
It's weird.
It is weird. It is weird.
It's weird, but it is what it is.
That's right. We're going to talk about weird things just in a moment. Miss Mandy Logan is here with us. Mandy, welcome.
Hey.
Oh, she's on mute. See, I called on you first because normally you're not on mute. Are you there?
Normally I'm not.
There you go. We can hear you now, Mandy.
Now you hear me. Okay. I thought production said there was sound on my mic, so I made sure to mute. But I love that the segue to me was weird things.
Yes.
I'm the one you thought of when you thought of weird things. Great.
Just one thing. I mean, weird in a good way, Mandy. It's weird in a good way. Another weird in a good way, Mr. Sam Bound is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Why, thank you. Weird in a good way would be my hacker handle. Yeah.
Nice.
Mr. Josh Mappet. I use my Rhode Island pronunciation of your name, Josh.
It's okay. Brooklyn, Rhode Island, it's similar. What are you going to do?
Yeah, Mappet.
So, and I'm joined by a little one for a few more minutes.
Your little ones are adorable. They get that from their mom. I know.
Damn straight. Not for me.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler,
my word.
What's going on, guys? Good to see everyone.
Wearing the vintage shirt.
You seem to embody from the dark corners of the internet that we put at the top of every show, Tyler.
That is
not just because of your camera,
accurate.
but for a lot of other reasons that we can't talk about on the show. Quick announcement. Don't let third-party risk ruin your Valentine's Day. Join Adrian Sanabria and Bill Brenner, two of my really good friends, in fact, on an SC Media webcast titled Understanding Third-Party Risk, Studying Third-Party Breaches. As listeners will know, Adrian loves exploring risk through our understanding of real breaches and incidents. They'll discuss how to prepare for some of the most concerning third-party risks you should be aware of. Along with the partner for this webcast, which is Process Unity, you can visit securityweekly.com/Valentine Risk to register. Sergey Bratus joined DARPA in January 2018, and after a brief sabbatical, again in March 2022, his research interests include computer security and intrusion analysis. He has made significant technical contributions in the area of language theoretic security, which aims to eliminate broad classes of input-driven exploitable vulnerabilities. He has published over 100 technical papers, and his research has received several awards. My favorite is most notably the 2012 Black Hat Pony Award for Most Innovative Research. Sergey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Sergey, I want to start with how you got your start in information security.
Therein lies a story. Once upon a time, I was a graduate student in a math department who just heard about this Linux thing. And I had to have a web server. I had to have a server and a web server. And I set up a web server. I followed the how-tos to the letter. And then a week later, I found that my server was serving not the things that I intended to serve and was doing other things on the side. And I couldn't understand this, right? I did everything by the rules. It should have worked. And yet there was this other side to it that was definitely there. I could see it happening. How did that happen? What else was there running on my server besides the things I put there? How did it get there? That started me down that rabbit hole.
It's interesting, Sergey. Many guests describe how they got into information security by describing how they got hacked, right? So you're definitely not alone. And being, was this in the 90s? Were you in the Boston area at that time?
Yes. That was the time when university computers were pretty much a breeding ground.
Yeah. Some would say that's still the case. Maybe not today, but certainly anyway. So did you change? So you were in mathematics at the time. Did you switch your educational focus at that point?
Not really. I'm still very much a mathematician. But what I realized is that there was this entire world of programs that we write without intending to do so, while we write the programs that we intend to write. And I wanted to study that. I wanted to understand that the best way I could, that is to say, mathematically.
It's interesting, Sergey. Most of us that have written or write software today think of a vulnerability and someone exploiting it as something really bad that should never happen, and it was an error. But I think you have a different take on this, that it's not so much an error, but a field of study more so than just a bug is what most would call it.
It is definitely a field of study. The way I think about this is there is this world of computation. And some of it is what we create and what we intend to create. But the actual universe, the actual computing universe that came from our technology is so much bigger and so much weirder. How do we manage to create so much of this weird space in which completely unintended computational effects happen? And how can we trust this? What should we do to trust those systems? What should we do to create computers that we could finally trust with doing just what we intended and nothing else? But as with any physical phenomena, much of the world is unexplained, and we discover that unexplained part continually by looking at the things that are weird. Back in the day,
well, I was going to say, using your example, that physical aspect of nature in and of itself, where what you're describing from a computer standpoint, where we have ones and zeros, right, should be mathematically and feasibly, computationally sound to expect things and know the outcome of math, right? However, what we were finding is it follows much more of the natural world. And so does that change our mindset and our ability to understand or think about vulnerabilities or software and how we interact with them and how the future or what the future holds for software as it pertains to what we see in nature?
I would say so. We do have this historical parable of classical mechanics. Physicists believed that the world was a gigantic set of particles, all on their preordained trajectories, like a stone thrown ballistically. And you just had to understand enough of that to be able to predict the course of events. That's sort of a mechanistic understanding of the universe. But then physicists started discovering strange things that no theory could explain. And what we now know as quantum physics came from a few weird corners of the physical universe. And I recall Max Planck, who was, of course, one of the creators of modern physics, quantum physics, was advised by his advisor to stop studying physics, study anything but physics. Physics is almost done, his advisor said. And it turned out that no. In fact, there was a completely different way of understanding matter. There was a completely different way of understanding nature, the quantum level, as we know it now, that was completely just not there in the physicists' concepts in the universe. I posit that we might be in just exactly the same position as computer scientists. Consider, we write code, we debug it, we deploy it, and then we find out that our code is usable in ways that we did not anticipate, could not anticipate, and it can accommodate such complex interactions, such complex compositions of what we would believe to be errors or insignificant consequences of this or that design, yet they add up to this dark mass of computation, of, as we say, emergent execution. Some people call it weird machines. In everything we build, we find those kinds of embedded processors, computers, systems, computational mechanisms, machines that we didn't mean to put there, yet they are there. They are exploitable. This is what makes attackers so powerful. This is what makes vulnerabilities portable.
Right. Yeah, because it's the variations on the same technique that allow attackers to exploit these so-called weird machines, right?
Yes. I coined this term, but I take no credit beyond just calling it that, because what I was doing at the time was summarizing the experience of the hacker community, the experience of the leading schools of writing exploits, where that understanding was already forming. That, in fact, it's not just malicious code that somehow gets on the target system and gets executed. It's actually the properties of the system itself, and they are repeatable and reliable, that allow exploits to exist and that connect completely unrelated implementations of the same thing by the kinds of exploits that they share, by the kinds of vulnerabilities that they share.
But Sergey, take me from a time, though, when the exploits were largely what we deem as shenanigans to, at some point in time, academia said, this is more of a field of study than it is just kind of cute shenanigans, right?
So in my experience, there was this one moment when it turned out that you could actually prove theorems about exploits, and that was what is now known as return-oriented programming, or ROP. Hovav Shacham in 2007-2008 published papers that had a theorem in them. He proved that if you look at the epilogues of functions, you could actually get a Turing-complete machine driven by a series of crafted stack frames or data that looked like stack frames. And that was the watershed moment as I experienced it. Prior to that, if you submitted a paper about an exploitation technique or a vulnerability, it would be frowned upon as, yes, this might be clever, but this is entirely ad hoc. There is no field of study here. There is nothing to prove here. What Hovav Shacham's papers did was demonstrate that you can, in fact, prove theorems about this. Whether these theorems actually bear on how easy it is or how hard it is to exploit a target, you almost never need Turing completeness for actual exploit, except it might come in useful in some circumstances. But that created a point in time where people saw a connection between mathematics, as in things that you can prove or write a paper about with proofs, and the practice of exploitation. Of course, if you look back 7 years before to BugTrack, to Gerardo Ricarte, you would find a post that said the same thing in somewhat different terms, that you can fetch any program out of pieces of existing software. And prior to that, you go back to Solar Designer and Tim Newsham, finding elements of this technique, and other papers in FRAC that generalize this technique. Tyler Durden in about that time demonstrated that you could use the dynamic loader as a part of that mechanism that you could just run and exploit on. But you see, this understanding was forming at that time, that there is something special about the target. There is something embedded in the target, like a virtual machine or a very strange, weird CPU that was really the platform that the exploit was running on. And that's why exploits were portable and reliable. They actually were kind of like bytecode, were kind of like instructions running in sequence on something like a virtual machine.
It's interesting, Sergey, but you're almost, it's like you're making the argument that these are not bugs or vulnerabilities. They're really features that people are taking advantage of to execute code, right?
That is what I believe. I believe this is correct.
Well, it's not just that. It's that they're features to exploit, but they are features that, because they are already built in and architected in, I'm not doing bespoke custom code, hand filed for everything I want to do. As you said, they're portable and reliable, which means that they are tools. And because they are mass producible tools, they are able to be examined as a class, not as an individual case study.
Precisely so. Precisely so. And this is what gives exploitation all the features of a discipline that you can teach and you can study and you can get the next generation to practice, which is exactly what happened. If you look at the schools of exploitations, there are schools of thought.
Do you think that the next iteration of this and the rise of machine learning and AI, we'll call it statistics, mathematics, right? Do you see that changing or evolving the discipline of exploitation and or how we protect or code against execution of these exploitations or vulnerabilities?
Most likely. I could point to a paper on adversarial reprogramming of neural networks, which was published by researchers out of Google a while ago. And what they showed was that you can train a neural network on a task, say counting squares in a picture. And then if you subject this neural network to other inputs with a crafted frame around this, then you could actually use the very same network to do something completely different, such as classify shapes.
So what you're saying, wait. You're saying that folding at home, instead, they'll build a botnet to create malware at home, because fuzzing started as throwing random crap into fields to find ways to get through. But now it's going to be directed in almost like a chess robot to constantly refine closer and closer and closer to an exploit until finally it finds an exploit that is portable, that is reliable, that is usable. And they'll just do this on a continuous and mass scale basis. It's the difference between moving from bespoke code to fuzzing random to building a framework that will build you malware.
So let me put this in perspective, right? What is an exploit? An exploit is proof by construction that your target system has unintended behaviors.
That's the best definition I've ever heard of exploit before.
It's beautiful.
Well, this is my 19th year of doing the show and interviewing people on this very subject, and that is the best description, Sergey.
Well, but this is what it is. You can't argue with the root shell. I'll quote Felix Lindner FX on that. The same way you can't argue with the mathematical proof. Here it is. So then when you discover that exploit, when you construct that proof, you can use any technique you like. You can use, as mathematicians do, a pencil and paper, or you can use, as some mathematicians do, a proof assistant, or you can use an AI that is feeding into that proof assistant and is trying to combine various pieces of a proof technique to give you the proof. The same with an exploit. And I will tell you more. Let's think about fuzzing. Fuzzing is, again, something that proves a property, if you're lucky, demonstrates a property of a program. So fuzzing is a form of program analysis. It's a randomized program analysis, or some people might say stochastic program analysis, but it's program analysis nevertheless. And in mathematics, randomized algorithms are a venerable field of study. Paul Erdős was certainly, the most published mathematician or the most prolific mathematician of all times. That was a part of what he did. Fuzzing is just like that for program analysis.
It's interesting, Sergey, to hear you describe this. And earlier you used the word clever, and it was even very recently that folks that created software and then were talking to the folks that found vulnerabilities in the software kind of deemed them as, in a derogatory way, clever hacks. The way you're describing what we do when we find flaws and exploit them in software, it's very much a research field of study. It's very different from the vendor going, oh, that was just a clever hack, and trying to dismiss it. And that, I think, is the main point that I think we're talking about tonight, right?
Yeah, that defender is very much at their own peril. Because what we're doing here, right, what we are doing when we do fuzzing, what we're doing when we create exploits is essentially exploring the fabric of this computational universe that we created. It is no different as a field of study from studying the fabric of the universe as we experience it while being immersed in it, called physics. And
except, Sergey, except that the field of the universe doesn't change at the same rate that technology changes that you have to study to build exploits for it.
Maybe.
The fundamental fabric of the universe exhibits change at a much slower rate.
Yeah, there are some physicists that might argue with that, but consider this. One of the key points of quantum physics, of the quantum view of the world, is that observation changes the outcome. Does that sound familiar?
Heisenberg. Yeah, Heisenberg and Schrodinger, absolutely.
There is a reason why we have Heisenbugs, right? That property of the world is very much quantum. And again, this is just a parable, the parable of physics. But consider, when we create structures, be it network sticks, be it data formats, be it particular algorithms, resource management algorithms, as in the case of Spectre and Meltdown, right? They are research management algorithms, or memory management algorithms, which are somehow subject to what we call massaging or memory feng shui. We are discovering properties that we didn't put in there, but they are there. And in that, we are discoverers. The same way as physicists are discoverers of the properties of the fabric of nature, of the universe.
Well, Sergey, yes, I appreciate all of this. And I want to go back to kind of piggybacking off of what Paul had said a while ago, that so you're saying the bugs aren't bugs, they are almost a feature. And part of what I'm getting from your descriptions is that, correct, like that bugs or even the exploits are basically showing the way to the computational fabric that like a truth that hasn't been uncovered yet.
That is exactly so. That is exactly so. I would say so.
Okay. And so then going with what Josh said, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, with Josh talking about the physical universe not changing, but the speed of technology constantly changing, then and how you're describing it with the computational fabric, it would be, sounds like more, no, than the computational speed is not changing any faster. It's merely trying to catch up on like tiny little pinpoints of the truth that the computational field holds.
Well, you could say that, or you could just say that we're so lucky to be exploring a very quickly evolving universe. Of course, the more we build, the more emergent behaviors we create. And you might say there were parts of this universe that weren't there before. When people started building cloud systems, you had the server model and a server client model, right? And it was pretty much end-to-end. Your server talks to your client. Now that lots of things are in the cloud, you have a different situation when there are many middle boxes, many intermediate steps, many proxies, rewriting your traffic, aggregating your traffic, transforming your traffic. Now, as a mathematician, I can tell you that string rewriting is a very rich computational model. Before Turing machines, before the lambda calculus that we now hold as the two models of computation, classic Turing completeness, there were Markov languages, which pretty much amounted to the same thing. And therefore, that string of mailboxes is likely a complete computing environment that you can probably program with just the right sequence of requests. Just like you could massage memory with just the right sequence of allocation requests, or how you could exploit Spectre and Meltdown in CPUs by just the right sequence of CPU instructions, each one of them benign, but somehow adding up to completely unexpected behavior and unintended behavior. So these parts of the universe are being created as we build up. Wouldn't it be nice to know? Wouldn't it be nice to have predictive power over what would be the long shadow of those designed in but unintended behaviors in the next thing that we're building?
Yeah,
well,
it's interesting, Sergey, like
you're saying that we're on the verge of the
bad
industrial
analogy.
revolution of exploitation. I'm sorry.
So I was just gonna say, like, a really bad analogy is like a squatter, right? Like, we build these amazing buildings and homes without the anticipation that we have these pockets where people can live in and breathe and live in these little pockets. I think it was with right here in Providence, Rhode Island, built this amazing structure as a Providence Place Mall.
Oh,
Lo and
yes.
behold, there's like people that found pockets in these little places where they could live and sustain for
Right.
long periods of time.
They literally built a cinder block wall with a door that
With
looked
a
like it
whole
bent
door,
there.
and it
would
been there
belong
for a while.
And it was an apartment, and they managed to steal power via an electric extension cord, and they lived there for almost 2 years.
I feel like that's an analogy to exploits and software that we have today.
I have an argument with that.
You might say that. I would also say that this is how cities always worked,
Mm.
right? This is how towns always worked. They grew organically. Sometimes they were planned and laid out, and then they changed organically from that point on. But yes, indeed, humans are
Sergey,
explorers.
What I hear is that you say that we are on the verge, the infancy, right at the beginning of the industrial revolution of exploitation.
I would say that we're on the verge of an industrial revolution of program understanding,
Okay.
of machine-assisted or automated program understanding. Because an exploit is just one facet of understanding the properties of the program. So is fuzzing. So is proving programs correct. We now have new kinds of programs. We now have a development mindset and process that is drastically different from write, debug, it works on the happy path, ship it. We now have a process through which you can create verified code that is accompanied by proofs that it does only what is intended to do. And this was one of the developments that DARPA pioneered. But yes, definitely, we are, I think, on the verge of that kind of revolution in program understanding. To an extent, this revolution has been prepared by the richness of exploitation, so that we understood or are beginning to understand how much of that emergent behavior is there in the software we build today with the processes we use today. Should we be changing those so that we can actually trust that software? Perhaps. But that exploitation, that exploration of exploitation did play its part. We now know that these are not just bugs, that these are not just somehow random flaws. They're something more than that. They compose, they chain up, they transfer between systems, even though if those systems were implemented in different languages and on different CPUs. These are emergent patterns, just like everywhere in nature.
Doesn't this exponentially doesn't this exponentially become a bigger problem now that we are developing such complex and interconnected systems that expand and have expanded to the extent where we actually can't even determine libraries, whether it's running in Docker, whether it has backend APIs, which systems are connected across which ecosystem. Like, we've gotten to the point where Moore's law just in hardware and software has exceeded its own capabilities, not to mention our complexity and the complexity of interoperable systems. So is any of this even obtainable to write and secure this code in these classifications?
So that's a very interesting thought, right? Is there a Moore's law for weird machines? Is there a Moore's law for that kind of long shadow for the designed in but unintended part of the systems we create? Maybe that kind of computational space doubles every so many years. I mean, I would credit that to you. But yeah, indeed, there may be such a law. But again, this is predicated on how we build systems today with the processes that we use. And everyone who's started programming with simpler systems early on knows the fun of getting to that happy path, right? And we don't look beyond that happy path. Once our program works on the examples that we intended to work on. But then the question is, what else have we created with this kind of a ad hoc, follow the happy path, debug it and ship it approach? So for
but that's a really interesting point, Sergey. Was where I was going is, as a developer, like you hit on like that happy path. Like I made it work. The program does what I intended it to do in my scope of what I was programming this thing to do. I don't often, like, put the security part of my brain aside for a moment. I don't often think about the unintended uses of this software, the other use cases of the software that I create. How do we get to a feasible path where developers are taking into account some of these other things? But how many times have we heard a developer say, well, no one's going to use my software in that way. That's not what I intended. Well, it's not about what you intended. It's about what other people are going to do with it that you didn't expect.
Well, it's about what you created. It's about what exists, right? Of course, there is a way to get yourself checked. And this is have something that is not biased towards the happy path. Check it for you. And this is what we call a formal methods. Formal methods are essentially having that kind of assistance that doesn't have the human bias, that won't overlook a dark corner, that won't overlook a part of the, let's say, data input specification that you just gloss over when you read that RFC. A solver, a prover, a mechanical assistant that doesn't have our bias towards the fun, happy path.
And it's interesting to look at the vulnerabilities that we've analyzed over the years. And I mean, this week is a prime example, right? If you look at the vulnerability in shim, I mean, it's a classic, like, buffer overflow. It is, I mean, absolutely. Even I could look at the C code and I'm really rusty with C and go, oh, that's a problem, right? But then you've got other very esoteric vulnerabilities that you're like, wow, like, it kind of blows my mind that someone thought and went down the path of researching, like, this is how you would exploit that. And then there's everything else in between. And I think as developers, we need tools to help us make sure that we produce the most resilient software that we can, because we can't do it on our own.
That's right. Well, this is why we need automated assistance. And DARPA has been leading the way. If you look at a series of programs out of the Information Innovation Office, it is exactly about getting the power and the efficiency of the formal methods into the hands of the developers without taking away the fun of development, without taking away the productivity.
Yeah, I think I gave you the example of Marty Resch, right? And 20 years ago, I was talking to Marty, and he was like, "Look," and we got to the topic of vulnerabilities in Snort. I'm like, "Look, you made a great contribution to the community. It's amazing we all are using this to defend our networks." But I'm like, your software could have vulnerabilities as well. And he's like, Paul, I really suck at writing parsers. and it's that parsing of unstructured data that always comes back to bite us, Sergey, right? And I don't fault him for that.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
Remember TCP dump? Remember the vulnerabilities in TCP dump?
Yeah.
That thing which you put on your network to understand what's going on, that thing that runs as root on that box, guess what? It's full of parsers.
Mm-hmm.
We're naturally bad at writing parsers. In fact, one of the principles that we've been trying to promote is don't roll your own parser. The same way as you don't roll your own crypto. Don't roll your own parser. Because input is tricky. Input interpretation is tricky. There is a very fine line between complex input being parsed and bytecode being executed on a virtual machine. In fact, a sufficiently complex input format is indistinguishable from a bytecode, and the parser interpreting it is indistinguishable from a virtual machine to steal the sufficiently complex technology is indistinguishable from magic. Aren't exploits magical?
They are. No, I completely agree. They totally are. And one of the other stories we're going to cover is, I always thought that sorting stuff was a fun computer science programmatic exercise. One of the first things you learn, like in computer science, until we look at how that can be exploited. And we see that in the Q-sort vulnerability in glibc. Like, my mind was blown as we take these fundamental computer science. This is the most effective way to sort data, but we kind of flip that on its head and go, well, that can lead to code execution.
You need complexity to sort data. You need complexity to transform data. You have to keep a really close watch that this complexity does not run away from you, that this complexity does not become a core of somebody else's exploit engine. Computational power exposed to hostile inputs is really privileged. And for that reason, you must analyze these pieces of code. You must apply proofs to those pieces of code to see that you are providing the complexity and the functionality you intend, and not yet another execution engine for exploits.
Is this a good use case for like AI and ML models to help do some of this evaluation? Because we've ran into this complexity of libraries and dependencies, and not only that, the interpreters or the language in which has been written at, we're not as low level as we used to be. Not as many people are writing in C or assembly or Pascal, any of those low level languages. And so with these interpreters and libraries and dependencies taking away all of the functionality and visibility for a lot of the very difficult things, are we able to do that? And do we need the assistance of things like an AI or ML model that maybe doesn't become biased and has the ability to evaluate multi-pass strings and functionality that is unintended?
So I'd say, why not? But let's look at the goal here. The goal here is proving a property, if you will, proving a theorem. AI ML is how. The proof is what. So can computers prove theorems? It seems so. They seem to be getting better at it. This question was actually posed by a mathematician, none other than the famous David Hilbert. That was the decision problem and Scheidung's problem. Is there an algorithm that, given a mathematical theorem, can decide whether it's true or false? Can a computer do this?
So an SBOM or what we're leaning towards right now, just to get the recipe or the dependencies, what's in the software, is that the first step, or do you see that as a step in which we could overcome and circumvent or short circuit in order to get to the outcome that you're talking about, which is not technically an SBOM?
It's a beginning.
Yes.
With mathematics, notation is really important. If you write out your arguments in longhand, then you'll be writing very long proofs. The history of mathematics has, to a certain extent, been a theory of notation. Different number systems that enabled faster arithmetic, different notations that enabled things like algebra and then calculus. You can look at SBOMs from that point of view as coming up with the beginnings of the right kind of notation that can then get AI, ML, or any other reasoning systems, automatic reasoning systems, to do this kind of cyber reasoning, reason about the properties of the program. Mathematical notation is always in flux. It's always developing. Certain things remain fixed for centuries. Certain things keep developing. We'll probably see the same thing with any notation that we use to describe programs. But we must take these steps. We must get this automatic assistance for reasoning about programs. I would say this.
Sergey, I just somewhat like non-technical question, but you seem to be really in tune with the hacker community and kind of the hacker spirit, more so than most that have an academic background, right? I don't want to knock anyone with an academic background, but again, sometimes they're like, oh, well, that's like a clever trick, not so much a science or a field of study. Like, what led you to embrace the hacker community more so than most that would have your background in mathematics, for example?
Well, first of all, whether I'm in tune or not, it's up to the hacker community to decide, right?
I think you're in tune, so you got my vote, okay? Whatever that's worth.
Seconded.
That matters a lot to me, right? But what I saw was a discipline of thinking about programs, thinking about program properties, a method of discovery, not graced with the name of an academic discipline or not recognized by academia, but having that complexity. And again, how do you know that something is science, right? The scientific method. It's repeatable, it's teachable. Well, it was there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So related. I'm gonna
go ahead.
Gonna do a little bit of fanboy on Sergey. I owe a good portion of my career to Sergey, whether he realizes it or not. Back in the day in ShmooCon 2, Sergey was taking some of his graduate students to do a presentation at ShmooCon and said, we have an hour-long presentation and we only need about 30 minutes. Do you want to come and fill the other 30 minutes for us? And the answer was yes.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, and it was the first time I'd ever spoken at a hacker security conference, and it was a blast. What was the topic? That was the I can't remember the exact title of the talk, but that was basically the stuffing an access point inside of other stuff.
Yeah.
For surreptitious attacks, and I had a blast.
The golden days of Wi-Fi hacking, right?
Yes.
And again, consider Wi-Fi was this wonderful protocol that had a very complex header formats for its time. Certainly a lot more complex than Ethernet. And guess what transpired? Right? Everyone rolled their own parsers in drivers. Lovely.
Yes.
So you get your exploitation engine for free in the kernel. You don't need to elevate privilege. You just need to keep this thing from crashing.
My coworker Dave Maynard is like cheering right now. Right?
Yes, those were the days. And again, this was something that systematized pretty fast. And just with everything that is first thought to be this kind of clever ad hociness, relevant maybe only to this particular system. Then it turns out that no. ROP was not an x86 artifact. Neither was memory massaging a DL malloc artifact. Neither was Spectre Meltdown just an Intel CPU artifact. But so we progress. We really do discover more of this fabric, and it's continuous. It's fascinating. Of course, the point is to understand how we can predict and control it.
Yeah, but that's the rub, Sergey. Like, I feel like we have a pretty good understanding of the various bug classes today. That there's today not as many new bug classes coming out as there were years ago. Can we architect our software and programs to be resilient against the bug classes that we know and understand today, or are we still in the learning phase?
So let me ask you this. Do we have an equally good understanding of how these bugs or behaviors or primitives compose? I would say that that's pretty much an open area. Yes, we may understand the classes of flaws, but why do these flaws chain up so well? I mean, thinking of myself as a freshly minted C programmer, and I wrote quite a bit of C before that fateful web server, Linux web server exploit. So I thought of myself as a pretty proficient C programmer, a numerical C programmer, aware of some of the gotchas of the floating point and that kind of thing. And then it turned out that there is a lot more than a crash, right? I was used to the thought that if you make a mistake in your C program, that program will crash.
Right.
That will be the end of it. And that's okay because, it won't do anything that you really don't intend to do other than crashing. Right? So you lose trust in that particular computation, you rerun it, maybe it won't crash. Maybe then, and you're good. It's just a weird thing. And then it turned out that those kinds of behaviors could chain up to really long chains, like rope chains, without crashing. And it's not just rope; it's SROP. It's what people call co-op, counterfeit object-oriented programming. All those tricks with virtual function tables in C++, virtual function pointers in C++.
It's interesting you say that, Sergey. One thing in my career and in my learning journey that sticks out in my mind is very much related to what you say, and that's Ed Scotus. Someday, 15 plus years ago, said that an exploit, buffer overflow exploit, is a controlled crash. I was like, like that, again, like 15 years later, that still sticks in my mind in the context of what we're talking about.
It is. It is a program. And for most of those kinds of programs, which resulted in a rope chain, it's a reuse of the automaton embedded in the program for the purpose of creating that control flow graph. Right? That control flow where you call a function, you return back, and it just so happens to be implemented with this particular approach to stack frames and saving a return address in that stack frame. Okay. Then it turns out that this automaton is programmable completely separately from the rest of the program to amazing results. Same deal with the memory allocator. It turns out that it is programmable by just sending requests of particular length in a sequence, and suddenly you persuade this memory allocator to allocate what you can overwrite, just like this one little byte, next to what you want overwrite with this byte. And it turns an improbable into almost definite.
But our solutions to this are things like ASLR and stack protections. But if those were the answer, we wouldn't be talking about this kind of stuff today, right? Obviously, we haven't got to the core of the issue to make more resilient software.
Correct. So you can think of ASLR or stack protection as permuting the implementation of certain abstractions, making them somewhat less exploitable in this particular way. Does that explain where this behavior comes from? Why it inevitably comes out? Why is it that abstractions leak? And they don't just leak to crash. They leak to compose into controlled crashes that can go on for hundreds of instructions on end. Right. I don't think we understand that.
And so are we not at the point where we can architect software such that it's resilient to these kind of attacks? And I believe that's your field of study right now.
That's right. I mean, this is what brought me to DARPA. How do we construct programs that we do understand much better than the current ways that are fun and productive, but produce all of this long shadow of unintended emergent behaviors? How do we construct software with non-cumbersome yet rigorous mathematical ways? And actually what brought me to this topic was, how do we define data so that our RFCs are unambiguous and our parsers could be generated from them? Because, most of the time it's a parser bug.
Right.
That starts this long chain of a controlled crash or this completely different life form or this new kind of a CPU that was always there but got unlocked by this one bug and suddenly is available for the attacker.
And it's like the first thing you learn in computer science is to separate that data from logic, but we still haven't nailed that principle.
Yeah, so it's a thing, right? It's a thing. Think of your typical models of computation that people get taught in computer science courses. Find a state machine, right? It would seem that you know that the characters that are consumed by a finite state machine are data. But no, they're actually code. You can think of them as instructions that affect the CPU, which is this finite automata, a very simple CPU. But what are instructions? Instructions are fetched, decoded, executed to change the state of the CPU. This is our fundamental model of computation. Is this string? This string is really code. More complex data is really indistinguishable from really powerful code, unless your parser has that kind of a correctness property that you can account for all of its possible behaviors on all of its possible strings. Which is to say, don't roll your own parsers.
Yeah,
generate.
Yeah, but Sergey, what you're saying, and the Dan Kaminsky, God rest his soul, spoke about this topic in not leaving some of these decisions to every single developer in the world to implement things like parsers and sending queries to the backend database on their own, was to develop libraries and constructs that programmers could use and be safe from these vulnerabilities. It sounds like you're advocating for the very same thing.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Dan was a visionary. And he and Len Sessamon, who also unfortunately passed away, and Meredith Patterson have seen that, and they started this. This became what is now known as the language theoretic approach to security, basically saying that input is indistinguishable from code. Any input is a program. Dan and Len and Meredith started that.
Langsec.
And it's a big proponent of this.
For sure.
Sarah Mudge, sorry, really quick. Sarah Mudge actually built out a way of using math to determine the security of code as well. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Sergey?
ICL, right?
Yes.
The metrics
Yes.
for security, right? Is that the?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yes. So again, I was persuaded to go to DARPA in part by Madge's example. It was amazing to see a hacker, a hacker visionary, an originator of many of these techniques. And again, I saw them as a discipline, making such a difference in such a place. So one reason why I'm here is that Madge was here, Mike Walker was here doing the Cyber Grand Challenge. The other reason, of course, is that the mathematics of software verification was also practiced here. And the first scalable results on the HACMS program were demonstrated that you can actually create firmware for a flying machine.
Yes.
Or a driving machine that is constructed in a different fashion and comes with correctness proofs. And oh, by the way, has parsers that are not penetrable.
Right.
By state-of-the-art red team. Fancy that.
This is
Bravo.
possible, and I'm very much excited that this work continues and can has the potential to permeate into all of the software that we create today. So, unfortunately, we're running short on time, Sergey. I'd love to bring you back because I feel like we just scratched the surface. I do have 5 questions left for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly? There are 5 silly questions that there's no right or wrong answer. So, Sergey, 3 words to describe yourself.
Hacker, mathematician. I like cats.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I don't think I would be a serial killer.
That's a great answer. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Something between an academic and hacker mathematician.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
That's probably Hackers, and it's not my sentiment, but that's one movie that shows hackers doing what they actually do.
Okay. I agree. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
So this is my weakest spot, right? Whenever something like Jeopardy or Trivial Pursuit comes in, if it were hacking, technology, or mathematics, I'd probably get by, right? Celebrities.
Well, so see, Sergey, it all depends on how you define celebrity.
A celebrity in your own mind.
A celebrity
right? Yeah.
in your own mind, like someone famous in your own mind. Like for me, someone famous in my own mind is my mom, just because of the adversary, the things that she had to overcome in her lifetime. So there you go.
There is a lot that I owe my parents that I do that it turns out they did too, but in a different way and in different domains of human endeavor. But I guess that's all of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Sergey,
Bravo.
I think that is an amazing tribute to your parents to say that the celebrities that I want to be my parents are my parents.
My actual parents.
My parents.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'll go with that.
I think that's the best, arguably, answer we've ever had to that question.
Sergey, I want to thank you for coming on Paul Security Weekly this evening. I absolutely loved our conversation, and I know our audience will as well. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to all of this philosophizing. I wish I had better, more precise mathematical terms. Of course, one day I might, or somebody else should, but
it was awesome.
Thank you.
Amazing. With that, we'll take a short break and come back with the security news. Stay tuned.